Introducing Recorded Content, a podcast for small, scrappy B2B marketing teams who want to get the most out of podcasting. In each episode, we capture stories from industry experts and podcasters. Listen in and uncover what it takes to launch, run, and grow a successful B2B podcast. Check out and subscribe to the show on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows. Let's jump in.
Hey, this is Justin Brown, the co-founder of Motion and your host for this episode of Recorded Content. Recorded Content is brought to you by Motion, a done-for-you podcast agency for small, scrappy B2B tech marketers. Today I'm talking with Lee Doubleday, the co-host of Imagine America Radio, where his show helps align students, counselors, and technical universities. Lee is another fascinating use case of sales/marketer turned professional content creator and podcaster. Lee started from knowing very little about podcasting to running podcast-based ads on Snapchat that generate hundreds of thousands of impressions. Listen in as Lee talks about everything from booking guests to fostering relationships, cutting, editing, and running ads, as well as getting sponsors for his show. Enjoy. All right, so you're one of my favorite types of guests that we have on here. You're the bootstrapped podcaster. I remember when you were originally going down this podcast journey. And, you know, when you did start going down that journey, and you can tell me if I'm wrong here, you knew either very little or a modest amount of podcasting before diving into it. And I want to get into that. I want to break down just what this journey's been like for you. But before we talk about how exactly you're executing on your podcast, talk to me just a little bit about how the idea even came to be.
Yeah, so my company actually at the time we were doing webinars, and we work really hard to help our career colleges communicate with their community. And we've been doing that through a webinar format for a couple of years, and it's been working great. But what we found was that a lot of times people would either join the webinar live, which is great, or they would listen to it later. And so we thought, okay, maybe we should be doing a podcast since people are listening to it anyway. Maybe we'll start to turn these into podcasts. Well, podcasting came up, and I thought I knew it all before I got into it. You know, like I thought I had it all set up, man. I had a Libsyn account, and I thought I knew everything, and it turned out I knew nothing about podcasting. But I did learn a lot along the way. This all started right before COVID hit, and it was a great time for podcasting because my career colleges needed a way to communicate with their community, and they weren't able to send representatives into the high schools to talk to students, and so they needed to meet the customer where they were, which was online and through digital content. And so I started providing a service where I would interview career colleges on the programs that they teach, and then I would promote that not only to high school counselors who can then tell that story to their students, but also students through different social media platforms and etc.
And we were talking about this just before we went on, if I remember correctly, and you said that I did. We started talking about podcasting when you were pitching the idea to management. So one of the things that we were doing at the time
that was tough.
Is we were looking to build out course material on all of the things you need to do to launch a podcast. And, you know, you came to me and said, well, one of the things I want to know about how to launch my podcast is how to get other people to let me do it. So what was that like, pitching the idea of the podcast to management?
Well, I'll tell you what, you know, it's always, what do they say? It's always better to ask forgiveness than permission. So I went ahead and I talked to people in my community and got them to agree to do a podcast with me before I had a podcast. And so it made the conversation a little easier when I did talk to management and said, well, it looks like we might be doing this because I've got some prospect guests that we've never been able to talk to that are interested in talking to us now all of a sudden because I'm starting a podcast channel. So it was a little bit of an easier pitch.
So you don't have a choice. I've already conducted these. If we don't do it, we'll be letting them down.
Right. Yeah. Essentially, yeah. But management was very quick to see that this is something that is a great opportunity for us to be able to promote the sector, but also help our current customer group get out in front of their community. And so it was really easy to pitch it, but I was a little nervous about how I'm going to pitch it because, as you know, discussions with management are always about ROI. And at some point, you're going to have a conversation with management about, okay, well, looks like this is taking X amount of your time, which is the biggest cost, is your time when you're running your own podcast channel. And then obviously the cost of, okay, well, this costs money to run ads and it costs money to promote this to, however you promote your podcast, it's not free. So at some point you have to have a conversation with management that says, okay, well, as a result of doing this, this is what has come out of it. And I'm happy to say that this is all positive, on what I've been able to do. But it has been challenging.
And how did you crack that code up front?
Well, to be honest, I started interviewing prospects of ours that, for whatever reason we've been talking to for a long time, and they weren't, ready to buy our services at that time. And I would invite them onto the podcast to kind of show them a little bit of what we can do. By way of background, we do a little bit of marketing for career colleges that want to get in front of high schools and potential students. And so by offering the podcast as a way to kind of show them what we could be doing at a small level, it allowed us to grow the conversations that we were having before. And it's just approached a little bit differently than cold calling and asking for a sales pitch and doing the whole old school dial.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it can be an amazing relationship builder. I mean, I hear that from so many people that we have on this show, that they're either able to foster relationships with people that they wish they could speak to, have greater relationships. How often do you get to have 30 to 60 minute conversation with someone in your space about whatever questions you want to ask them?
100%. And the other thing is, unfortunately through the pandemic, this has gotten a lot easier for us to do, right? I mean, before the pandemic, I had used Zoom a few times. But now, I conduct my podcast through Zoom. It's just easy, for people to be able to do and to jump on a call. And it's in this format like we're doing right now. Now, you don't use Zoom, but it's similar. And it's video recorded. And people are a lot more, I think, open to conversations like that, especially when you say, I have a podcast that's going to promote you and what you do. It's a different approach. And you're right. You deepen relationships you already have or create new ones through it.
And for the audience to know, Lee and I don't work together. He's not a customer of Motions. And it's why I find him and folks like him so fascinating. Podcasting takes a ton of work, and the people who have been able to stay consistent with podcasting for business especially, in my opinion, are incredibly impressive, because it's not just necessarily a hobby that you pick up and put down when you feel like podcasting. It's a part of your work that you have to stay consistent with. So for this next section, Lee, what I want to talk about goes into the work that you do for each episode. And I'm going to take you through it kind of methodically, because I know there's so much to it. So first, let's talk about prep for an episode. Yeah. What do you have to do to both find a guest and then prepare for that interview?
Well, I would say even a step back from that, the biggest thing that I have learned is that if you're going to start a show, you should have a structure to the show. So at first, when I first started podcasting, I wanted to get as many prospects and my core group of friends on the podcast as I could to provide value. But from a listener's perspective, it's been much better received since I've organized the episodes. So every month has its own, in our world, it's all career education focused. So every month has its own sort of career focus. So we might be doing like health sciences in January and then welding in February. And having that structure and that organization really helps you down the line, keeping everything organized as to, okay, here are my prospective guests because they do this. And that's what I'm gonna look at. A month prior, I got to start sending out invitations to the podcast and getting people ready. And there's a lot that goes into it. I usually provide a mock script for every episode that I do. So I will do the research on the career, and I'll look up, Bureau of Labor Statistics data, and we'll talk about, I'll ask questions about that particular career. So I have to know, what to ask, and I have to be a little bit knowledgeable of whatever topic it is that we're going to be talking about, and that takes time to put up all of that and to do the mock script. So what I'll do is, in order to book a guest, it's either cold outreach or through LinkedIn and just my community of people that I know. I either know somebody that works at pretty much every school that is in my space. It's a prospect of ours. It's a relatively small space. So I know somebody. They may not be, a C-level executive or whoever it is that I want to interview, but I'll know somebody there that knows the right person to help me be connected. And so it's maybe a little bit easier for me than a lot of your listeners because I sort of already have some relationships where I can grab. But I would say it's mostly LinkedIn research and then reaching out either cold LinkedIn or, like I said, through a contact that I already have in my database. But I'll do it that way. And then I'll come up with a mock script, and it'll all be questions geared around whatever program we're going to talk about. And that takes a good amount of time. And you have to know a month ahead of time which guests are saying they're going to do it and which guests actually do show up to do it. It's a totally different thing. I'm sure and that's the biggest headache, I would say, is as organized as you are, being a podcast guest is a luxury. So you may have your deadlines and what you want to do, but you're not really operating. Nobody else is operating on your schedule. And so you just have to know that, so I would just say you have to plan things out months in advance on who your guests are going to be and what topics you want to cover in order to stay organized. And then that doesn't even get into what goes in post episode and all the editing that goes into that.
We're going to get into that in just a second.
Yeah. So that's a lot of work just up front, and then the actual interview is the easy part.
Yeah, I had fun in doing my homework on your show. I learned about I listened, and it was your IT segments where you do like 3 or 4 episodes on a specific topic, and then I learned a little bit about welding, so that was cool. And learned about wearing an Oculus and so
metaverse welding.
But it's fascinating, and if you are
it's cool
in that space, you get the opportunity to learn about it, which is something that I preach a lot. Is trying to take. Look, edutainment is great. I love that term, right? Trying to make it fun and either funny or interesting or what have you. But at the end of the day, people are tuning into, in most cases, business podcasts to have some sort of takeaway. And you seem to provide a really nice view for people who are listening to your show to be able to understand different topics and subject matters. And I do like that kind of seasonality of it where you go for a month on a certain topic. What led you to want to do that?
I think that if you're going to do a podcast, you need to have some sort of structure, whether it's, it's not just consistency, like posting once a week or deciding, because that was my original intent was like, I want to post a podcast twice a month. And the organizational structure of it was really partly for me, but also because I know that there are schools out there that are teaching these programs and that would like to get these programs in front of prospective students and my database of high school counselors. So it was partly driven by the customer, but also helped me stay organized.
So let's get into the actual work that goes into one of these things. Lee and I, for the audience, were joking before this that it does take a little bit of time to produce podcasts. And again, it's why I like bringing on people with your background. Over the last probably 10 interviews I've done, half of them have been just people who are running either the full or 75% of the gamut on putting together a podcast. I'm blessed in my own right of owning a company that I have a team that puts my stuff together for me. So I get the fun part of jumping on with you and having this fun conversation.
Yes, this is easy.
And then in 7 business days, I'll have my video and my audio and my written content that I'll review, maybe give some notes on up front. But for the people who are actually there, pounding the pavement, it's always fascinating for me to hear the work that goes into it. So once you've recorded your episode, you've had your fun conversation about the Oculus and how the bunch of kids out there are going to want to become welders because they got to play with the VR set, which was just super interesting to me.
It is really cool.
What do you do next to actually create the episode?
Yeah, so what I'll do is I will throw it into, and this is just, I'm getting really granular probably, but I throw it into Audacity. Yeah, I throw it into Audacity. I prefer Audacity. It's where I started. It's just easier for me to do all of my editing in Audacity. So I do my editing in Audacity, and then I throw it into Headliner for Snippets. I'll do that, and I throw it into a transcription service that transcribes my episode. It's called transcribeme.com. And in the meantime, I'll work on my snippets and start creating my ads for Snapchat, Facebook, Instagram, whatever the school partner that I interviewed says is the way that they would like to have that sent out. I'll work there and I'll do that while this is being transcribed. And in the meantime, I'll make the ads and I make a landing page for every episode. So I go into the back end of my website. I create a new blog post for that page. I'll then link that page throughout my website. And my website has a tab where we host all of the episodes on Imagine America Radio. So it's sort of, section is just podcast episodes. And so I make sure that the blog is in chronological order on when the podcast went out and what topic they're on and which season it is, etc. So I'll make the blog post, I'll transcribe the episode, and then I make the ads, and I'll send out the ads, and I send out, I put together an email that goes out to our newsletter of high schools that are in the area where that college is being interviewed. So if they're in Phoenix, Arizona, I send it out to my high schools in Arizona to let them know about the new episode that came out. And then I also send it out to my college sector list so that they can see what I'm doing. And so that they know, hey, it looks like Imagine America Radio had another episode on welding in the metaverse, and this is cool, and I want to check it out, and I want Lee to interview me about my program, And so it's a lot of work because I have multiple audiences, right? I have a high school counselor audience, and the way that they like to be communicated through Facebook and email, and then I've got prospective students who would like email, sure, but definitely more Facebook and Snapchat and Instagram. And then I've got my college partners who are going to receive an email from me, just kind of letting them know what's going on. And then, we also get sponsors of these episodes. And so the sponsor wants to make sure that they're in front of the colleges, et cetera. So it's a lot of work, and I got to get everything. The other thing is, and this is maybe something your audience doesn't have to deal with, or I don't know, is I have to deal with compliance. So every episode that I send to my college has to be reviewed by somebody else in compliance, and then they come back to me and say, hey, you can't say this word and you can't say that word, and you got to remove this. So then I got to go back and edit it again, and it just adds hours or days to the schedule that I came up with in the beginning. So I hope that answers your question, but yeah, it's a lot of stuff.
Yeah, no, that's great. And, it really depends for my audience, what space they're in as well. We have both customers and listeners who are, for example, in the cybersecurity space. And,
right.
That it requires a lot of compliance. And so they'll deal with that more than others. And then we have people who play more in the MarTech space that are, more free to wheel and deal their opinions and thoughts. So it really depends. And yeah, I mean, those last second changes or, last second feedback, or even if it's not last second and it just comes up and you did all this work and you got to peel back the onion and get back into it, just adds time and more work on your side.
Yeah, you have to be pretty flexible. I mean, if somebody comes to you and says everything's good to go, and then you release the episode, and then they say, wait, no, it's not, and then you got to go back in and pause everything, edit the landing page you made, edit the transcription, edit the content, everything. So, yeah, it can definitely be time-consuming.
And something that you mentioned was sponsors for your show. It's something that I get asked about a lot. We don't.
Sure.
We do some sponsorship things here and there where they make sense. Mm-hmm. It's not something that we work with our customers too much on. I'm curious what and not that I'm against it. I mean, people do great things with sponsorships on podcasts. But what led you to go down the path of getting your episodes sponsored, and what does that consist of?
To be honest, somebody within my space had reached out to me wanting to sponsor the episodes. So all of our episodes, like I mentioned earlier, they're geared towards me interviewing a college on a particular program they teach. Let's take the welding example.
Yeah.
Welding in the metaverse. And that was...
Which has got to be one of the coolest names of a podcast episode that I've ever heard
Right.
in my life. Welding in the
welding.
metaverse.
Yeah, it's here, baby.
Yeah, we all
So,
thought we were
yes.
just going to be showing each other our NFTs and playing with cryptocurrency, but there's people out
They're
there
making
throwing
bridges.
on the welding mask and
That's
firing up the blowtorch.
That's right. Yeah, you're right. So I made that episode and I interviewed the college that teaches this program. And essentially, I mean, the coolest thing is that if you're a welder, you don't have the equipment at home to be able to practice. You have to be in school, but now you do because you have an Oculus and you can do it virtually. A lot of it's muscle memory, but enough of that. It was cool.
I'm gonna be a professional welder by the time this episode is recorded.
Exactly. So I'll interview them, and then I will promote that episode to the high schools around their campuses. They have one in Phoenix, one in Tulsa, one in Houston, and one in Jacksonville. So I'll do my efforts there. But I'll also email that episode out to my list of prospects and other colleges maybe I'm doing business with or that I'm not doing business with, that I've just collected this database through the years of going to trade shows and dealing with sales calls, etc. So there are companies like my own company that wants to get in front of that list as well. And so I was approached by a group that said, hey, have you ever had a sponsor of one of these episodes? And basically what they're looking for is eyeballs, impressions. They want to know how many people are going to listen to their opening snippet in the beginning of every episode. But the biggest thing is I introduce that vendor to every school that I interview for that month. So let's say I do nursing in October. Mm-hmm. And I have a sponsor, Korsky or whoever it is, ambassadors, bookstores. It doesn't matter what it is. It's a vendor that wants to get in front of 4 or 5 schools.
Okay.
And so what I'll do is I'll do an email introduction after every one of those episodes when I provide the reporting, and I'll say this would not have been possible without the help of our sponsor, which is true. It is true.
Yep.
It wouldn't have been possible without the help of the sponsor because that allows me to do a little bit more with every episode that I get. And so it opens up a relationship between the vendor and the school outside of just me, and allows them to have a conversation from a different standpoint than somebody cold calling that prospect.
Yeah, that's great. And it really shows that you're providing more than just an ad read out of
Right.
what your sponsorship is. And I think that's maybe why we have not played so much in the sponsored ad space. You
Sure.
read my content on LinkedIn every day. I don't
Yeah.
talk about it much. I do here and there, but I think that it really needs to be circumstantial. Either, when it comes to a B2B tech company putting out a podcast, I mean, you're going to need to either get mass amounts of downloads and be one of the most popular podcasts in your space, which is certainly achievable, but not everybody is going to be that person, or there needs to be some sort of other kind of mutually beneficial agreement where, well, not only am I going to do this ad read, but you're also going to get X, Y, and Z, which is
Right.
more typically where we have found ourselves looking for ad reads, which is, some sort of combination sponsorship. I get this, you get that, here's how we're going to get exposure, here's how we're going to work together. So I find that interesting that you've been able to kind of find this way for these sponsorships to make sense in a variety of ways for the people who are interested in sponsoring your show.
Yeah, it's it was great that I was approached by a vendor too. That made it a lot easier because it's like, yeah, sure, absolutely, it helps everybody. It helps the school, it helps us. Yeah, I mean, I don't have a Joe Rogan podcast with millions of listeners or anything like that, and I'm not so much judged on how many people are reaching out off the logo that's on the landing page and they're clicking and going to a request form. That's not really the ROI that the people that are sponsoring my episodes see. It's more the personal introduction to the individuals who I just became friends with when I was interviewing them for the podcast, saying, hey, this is a great company, this is what they do, check them out, would you accept a phone call from them? Way warmer lead than them trying to call them themselves.
And in terms of your approach to distribution, what are some of the things you are doing to get your show noticed?
Yeah, we do, like I mentioned earlier, Facebook ads. That's a big one. But I would say the biggest is Snapchat. Just by nature of our demographic, the students that are entering career and technical schools being anywhere between 18 to 36 years old, all are on Snapchat. And I would say Snapchat's probably our largest, the one we spend the most time and energy on, just because it's a way to get somebody hooked on what it is you're talking about, and then go into the landing page where we have the full episode and we have a little bit more about the guests and what we talked about. But also LinkedIn. I do a little bit of LinkedIn. You see my LinkedIn content. It's not as intense as what I'm doing on those other platforms. I do a lot more on those other platforms. And then obviously email marketing was a big one for us, as we have a relatively large list. Our space is kind of small, but it's a large list of high school counselors that we send out every episode to. So
tell me more about Snapchat. I don't think that I have interviewed anyone to this point who is using their podcast on Snapchat. So I would love to hear more. What are you doing with your podcast on Snapchat?
Yeah, so I mean, you're familiar with Headliner.
Mm-hmm.
I know what you guys do is way more sophisticated than that, but Headliner is pretty easy for me to use, and they have a really cool Snapchat tool within Headliner, which helps me create snippets for Snapchat. So I'll use that, and I'll create my snippet, and I basically do what you do on LinkedIn with your video ads, but I run it on Snapchat, and I'll work with the school. So most of the time I'm talking to somebody in marketing that works at the school that'll tell me, even though I most likely already know this, their typical student, like their avatar of a typical student. And I'll go out on Snapchat in the ads manager and send that to as many people that I think look like that student through Snapchat, and then focus it on the demographics where they're recruiting students from. And then I'll send that out, and it crushes, man. We get like 500,000 impressions every episode and a bunch of swipe ups to the landing page, and it's been really good for us.
Kudos to you. That is awesome. Yeah. And I can't imagine that there's that much content out there on, your space, and using Snapchat through podcasting to be able to reach hundreds of thousands of impressions. So my guess is, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, a lot of this has been trial by fire.
Oh yeah, definitely. At first, mostly it's just understanding your customer, right? I know that the customer is on Snapchat, and so I thought, okay, I need to figure out a way to put my podcast on Snapchat. And so at first, and Headliner has definitely made a lot of improvements than when I first used it 2 or 3 years ago, and it was, my ads were janky. Like, I mean, they were raw. You'd have to be really interested in what I'm talking about to swipe up.
We've all been there.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't using Comic Sans or whatever, but it was basically like it's pretty basic stuff. But since then, both Headliner and I have evolved, and so they're a little better now, and they perform a lot better. But yeah, you're right. It was a lot of trial and error. Also finding out, the back end of Snapchat Ads Manager it's similar to Facebook, but it's a little different, and just playing with that and figuring that out also took some time. But we're good now.
So we're going to change gears a little bit here. For years, and I don't know if you know this, but Motion worked with a handful of nonprofits and associations. And one thing that we definitely saw was that outside of the annual conference or trade show type content, these types of organizations at times do struggle with consistency with their content. For you, how has a podcast allowed you to find the right level of consistency within your content strategy?
I would say the biggest way that the podcast has helped me is to be able to have and maintain relationships with the individuals who I'm interviewing on the podcast and my current customer base. So if I'm reaching out and I'm asking them to join my show, chances are I've gone to their website, I've looked at a lot of what they're already talking about, and I want to make sure it jives with my mission as a nonprofit organization to promoting career and technical education. So I'll go to their website and I look at, say, a blog that they have on welding in the metaverse, and I think that's really cool. Mm-hmm. And so I want to make sure that I put that into my Skilled Trades Awareness Month. So I have my plan already organized, and then I go out to these websites and I try and find people who are writing similar type things, and then I invite them to join my podcast. Like just the other day, I was talking to a trucking organization, and they're a nonprofit institution too that is helping, I guess, place truckers, as this country just needs a lot of truck drivers. And I saw an article on LinkedIn and decided to reach out to the guy, but it fits inside what I'm doing already. So I've got my structure situated to know that I'm next month I'm doing top trending careers of 2022, and I want to interview somebody in trucking because I mean that's just growing like crazy right now. So I don't know if I answered your question.
Well, you did, and let me rephrase it. So right now you're doing, is it four episodes per
one a week? Yeah.
And on each topic. So are you going to do 4 episodes on welding?
So it's skilled trades awareness. So that's welding, HVAC, electrical, and construction trades.
Gotcha. Okay. And so before the podcast, were you able to bundle this level of consistency of content? Because Lee, I mean, frankly,
no.
it's impressive. The fact that you're able to have month after month this focused, consistent content that people feel like they can rely on you for. And what I've just historically seen from my experiences with nonprofits and associations is the content strategy. A lot of times you have multiple people who are either in communications or marketing, or there's some sort of combination of both, and they're getting, feedback from CEO to also advisory board members, and the content strategy can be relatively loose. And what I've seen from what you're doing, which I find both fascinating and impressive, is your ability month after month to carve out these content bundles. And so the question was just around, and let me reframe it, how have you seen your content strategy evolve from pre-podcast to post-podcast?
Well, I would also say even when I first started podcasting, I lacked a framework. And it was mostly because I'd be talking to somebody today and we talked about something really cool. So I came up with this idea and then I wrote a script and I said, I want to invite this person because at the time I was more concerned with just getting content out and less concerned with the structure of how I was doing it. And so once I started structuring, the content came a lot easier to me because I knew that this week was going to be this week was going to be this week was going to be this. And I think it just takes a person inside the organization to take the content management by the horns and just say, this is what we're going to do. And here's where our prospects fit or our current customers fit. But you got to figure that out and have your plan situated first.
Awesome. Yeah, that was kind of what I was getting at. And I figured it was in there just because I've seen it. I've seen enough of these between my business partner, Tristan, and myself. I mean, we've probably worked with 150 nonprofits or associations over the last, 10 or so years. We're much more focused now in B2B technology, but I still have some of that knowledge, and just seeing what you've done has been very impressive. And it is something that I want to talk about with you. And here's going to be where we're going to pivot a little bit from what you're doing to you, actually you. One of the things that I like to ask people about is, and I get answers that, really keep me back enjoying being in this podcast space, is what it just does for individuals. I imagine good things have happened for you since starting the podcast. And I guess it is podcasts plural now. But just what impact has podcasting had on you and on your career?
It's been immeasurable. I would say that without the podcast, I would have less friends. I wouldn't know as many people in my space. It's in some ways better than going to a conference and sitting down for a lunch. If not the equivalent, it might be better, because you just get a different type of relationship through podcasting than you would going to a conference and meeting somebody at a booth. There's a lot of outside noise going on. People are talking to a million other people at those networking events. They don't remember what you talked about. With a podcast, you get a chance to interview somebody and get to know them on a personal level, and it's recorded and you're promoting it. They're going to listen to it 4 or 5 times. They're going to show their friends and family. It's just a completely different tool than going to a conference or meeting somebody, at some event. So I would say it has helped me create more personal relationships with my customers and my prospects.
Well, I think with that is going to be a good spot for us to end. And since we're coming up on our time, I do want you to have the opportunity to tell the audience where they can go to learn more about you and what you're doing at Imagine America Foundation and with Imagine America Radio.
Yeah, thanks. If you want to learn a little bit more about career and technical education, or you know somebody that is interested in career and technical education, please have them visit our website. It's www.imagine-america.org/podcast is where you find all of our podcast content.
Awesome. Well, Lee,
thanks, Justin.
Thanks again. I really appreciate you spending some time with me. Man. It was great having
this is
you
cool.
on.
Honestly, I'm taking notes because you're a really good host and you do a lot of things really well. And I was thinking, man, I need to copy some of this,
All right, we're going to leave that in the recording. Thanks, everyone.